good morning and welcome back to Spidz YouTube. Today we're going to be going over our game versus Sley from CDS Season 2, Week 1. I'm going to try and put a little bit more of a focus on one specific deck that we worked on and refined, and hopefully I put that in the title somewhere. For the games are actually not the most interesting part of what's going on, and I think that, like, you know, if you watched the CDS last season, you will see that we spent about half the video talking about how we prepped and half the video about post-prep, like what actually just happened in the games. But I want to do like a lot more focus on the prep side of things this time around. So when going into like a new CDS week, right, you've got, you know what champions are going to run, you have like a relatively closed field, right? It's just like preparing for an open, except it's a much more closed field. It's a closed. Okay. We can look at our champions and their champions. We've got Gwen, Leona, Draven, Nilla, Kennen, Lucian, Sejuani, Kaisar, Gangplank, Poriking, and Sley, who has got their team of Seraphine, Viego, Nora, Kanan, Aatrox, Quinn, Riven, Shyvana, Aesol, and Pyke. You can mostly ignore Pyke. That was just there because it was the last champion that was possibly purchasable by Sley. It is probably more important when you're thinking about preparing for an enemy gamer, if you want to min-max your chances of winning, to figure out what is going on with them and then build yourself around them. If you're trying to like make sure you also have fun, it's probably better to focus on what you're doing and then try and finagle that around them. But if we're trying to focus on winning, we should focus on what they're doing, right? So if we look at their champions, right, they've got, you know, Seraphine and Viego are sort of powerful. They've got Kanan Aatrox, which is clearly like the strongest thing they've got going on is Kanan Aatrox, right? It's a meta deck. It's like the only meta deck really there. Like Dragons we know as a deck and Nora Viego we know as a deck, but that's pretty much the only meta deck they've got, right? But furthermore, let's say they don't bring Kanan Aatrox, right? Let's try and construct like every possible scenario that they could bring. We're just like preparing for a Runeterran Open. Like what are all the possible lineups that we could see? If we go through all of their lineups, even if they bring a Seraphine deck, a Viego deck, and a Nora deck, there will be a mid-range deck in here somewhere. Unless it's like Seraphine X, Viego X, Nora X, there will be mid-range present. And honestly, even if it's Nora X or Viego X, there will be a mid-range deck there somewhere. You will be able to see it in a mid-range light, right? But typically, you're probably going to see those three champions, two of them combined, which means you're probably seeing like a control deck, a mid-rangey control deck, and then just a straight-up mid-range deck, right? So even if they don't bring Kanan Aatrox, there will be somewhere in their lineup Dragons or Riven Quinn or Aatrox Quinn or Kayn Quinn or Shyvana, something along those lines, right? Even if they bring something like Seraphine Nora, Viego, what's the control region for Viego? Riven, we do like Legion Defender, whatever that guy's called. Viego, just like old red Viego. There will still be a mid-range deck in there somewhere, right? So when going into this, as provided that we counter mid-range, we will win, right? If we have a lineup that can just demolish mid-range, there will be a win that occurs straight from that. It's better than, for example, trying to just target Seraphine, because if they bring three mid-range decks, which is possible, you can just do Kayn, Aatrox, Riven, Quinn, and Dragons, and that's already three mid-range decks. Countering just Seraphine won't be enough, but countering mid-range will unambiguously be right. Like 99% chance countering mid-range will work against Sley. How do we beat that, right? How do we beat Sley? If we're saying, okay, probably Kayn Aatrox, and if not Kayn Aatrox, there will be at least one mid-range deck. How do we go against that? The first thing when looking at our stuff is that we've got Sejuani, right? Sejuani, if you just level Sejuani and have a couple warning shots, they cannot win the game, and you have an overwhelm unit that will pressure them enough, right? Sejuani will inevitably beat mid-range. What Sejuani decks can we build? Well, there's the obvious of Plunder, right? Plunder's like the most obvious Sejuani deck that exists. You could also do Sedge Gwen or Sedge Draven, sort of like as a more overwhelm-focused deck. You could do Sedge Kennen, where you're just basically playing Pokestick and like Inventive Chemist, and it's sort of like Ping City, but in Freljord. That's not going to be great, but it's possible. And then if Gangplank is taken, but you really want Bilgewater, you can always just do Sejuani Nilla, right? If Gangplank needs to be brought to another deck, maybe for power reasons, because they might be banning the Sejuani deck, then you can just put Nilla in there to replace the Gangplank and all will be fine, right? So let's cross those off. We've got two champions already organized. We can go off Gangplank, but Gangplank is almost certainly the main one, right? We should stick with Gangplank as our primary option, and if we want Gangplank for something else later, we can think about things more. Next deck to think about beating mid-range is Red Gwen. I'm a big fan of Red Gwen. It's one of my favorite decks. It is my favorite competitive deck of all time. And I do like the matchup against Kayn Aatrox. I think it's a good matchup. I think it feels strong and powerful and favored for Red Gwen, but it's not easy, but it's strong, right? I played this a lot during the World Ender season, which you can actually find VODs of in like old Spidz YouTube. And compared to like regular Red Gwen, where there was Katarina, you don't really need Katarina in that matchup. She's powerful, obviously. But Draven does very similar things, just a strong unit that needs to be blocked every turn and cannot be blocked favorably without adding buff spells or some sort of interaction piece, right? So I thought, okay, let's do Red Gwen. That'll be the second deck. Let's cross those off. We've got 6 champions remaining. What are the decks that we are sort of trying to go for? We could do a Leona deck with Sunburst, because Sunburst, you do it on Aatrox, you do it on Kayn, and it'll feel pretty good, right? You could do the Poro King. If the Poro King can get bigger than Aatrox, just with constant scaling, then the Poro King seems great as a bigger than mid-range deck. There could be Kaisar. If she's strong enough to beat Aatrox, maybe that's an option, right? Or mid-range in general. We could try going towards a bit more of an aggressive route. I'm thinking something like Nilla Kennen with this. There's something there with aggro, and then like if push comes to shove, we can do a champion strength deck. I don't like champion strength. I think it's boring. I've given it a nauseating emote, which is very valid considering how boring champion strength is. Do I have water? I'm gonna get some water. So I looked at this and I was like, okay, the Poro King right now is currently doing well in ladder, and it's a Targon deck. There is a list that I can steal from that has some proven meta strength because it's currently doing well in ladder. Let's try that. That was my first instinct. So we started with a list that looked like this. This is the Poro King list that's currently on ladder, except it normally runs 2 Yuumi, and it's pretty much just this. It's got Hush, it's got Sunburst, it's got these sort of cards that are sort of alright. And I tried this into the Aatrox deck, and the first 2 games that I played as scrims against Aroma, I did not draw a Poro King or a Poro Snacks, and I lost unambiguously. It was absolutely a horrendous thing. And so that's obviously a bad sample size of 2 where I just don't draw my cards despite fulliganing for the Poro King, right? Or I may have kept Poro Herders, but similar. So I went to that and I was like, okay, I have access to Shurima. I could predict, and because it's Eternal, I do have access to stuff like Rite of Calling. Obviously, after run 6 champions, I can't do Mono Poro King, but the logical connection was there. So we tried something more like this, which was Kaisar Poro King, with Forsaken Bakai and Quicksand, which was a lot better than Hush. If you're fighting Aatrox, Hush does basically nothing that Quicksand doesn't do, but Quicksand prevents the enemy gamer from doing Furious Wielder onto your Poro King, right? Hush doesn't prevent that, right? So Quicksand, like this came across as a lot stronger. Rite of Negation helps against things like Furious Wielder. Quicksand helps against Furious Wielder. Quicksand can prevent lethals. This seemed like a lot stronger of a deck. And for quite a while, this actually worked. We were able to get our Poro Snacks to be bigger than the Kayn Aatrox deck. If you set the Poro King on 5 or 6 and you get your Poros and Frosted Snacks will blow them out, you just need 1 Frosted Snacks and you pretty much can win the game off of that. You felt fine. After about 4 or 5 games of this, just making sure, testing the list, editing things a little bit, Roma started taking the Shadow Assassin instead of Rast. And once you look at this deck, you will realize that we have no way of dealing with the Shadow Assassin. We don't put them on a clock. We are just outvaluing them. If they take the Shadow Assassin, they will win. Now, there are solutions to this. In theory, you could, add even more predicts to try and find Quicksand quicker. But the Poro King's a lot like Seraphine, where, 23 cards or some more have to be dedicated to leveling the Poro King and accessing your Poro King value cards every single turn, and you cannot really justify putting too many cards that are like bricks into that, because what you don't want to do is not have your Poro King leveled by 8 or 9, right? You have to make sure you've got all these plethoras of Poros. This isn't a particularly refined deck because I had to build it myself, but it was something we tried, and then we decided it couldn't work. It wasn't being consistent, and we had some time to try and look for other decks. There was a small period of time where we thought, okay, instead of trying to be bigger than the Aatrox deck, let's go smaller than the Aatrox deck. Let's go under them with elusives. And so we built what I think is a really cute list of basically, Poro elusive aggro. It's like Iceborne Poros, except Iceborne was taken by Plunder. But what you can do is use the Poro King to get Daring Poro and Poro Cannon, and then you use Kaisar as a 5-mana Poro, a 5-mana Daring Poro. And we tried it, didn't win, we got rid of it. It's pretty much just how it happened. But I thought I would mention this because I thought it was kind of a cute thing that happened in this little story. So, we had this Kaisar Poro King deck. And so I thought, okay, let's just go for Kaisar, right? Let's cross off the Poro King from our list of options. Kaisar has a strong concept. There's a strong concept within Kaisar. Let's go for Kaisar. Let's see what that deck looks like. So I built this. I've played Kaisar once in a tournament before because Donut was supposed to play and then Donut went away last minute, so I filled in for Donut, but lineup-wise, he was going to be bringing Kaisar back during Sentinels. Everyone remembers Sentinels, right? We got paid for that, right? Anyway. Kaisar Lucian was a deck. I built this. It's not particularly refined. I just tried to see what would happen if I tried to build Lucian Kaisar. I played one game. I absolutely blew Roma the hell out of the water. I went something like Voidling into Broadwing, into Greenfang Warden, into Void Blaster, into Kaisar, into Lethal, right? And he had like 2 units. But at that point, it was like 1 a.m. and I wanted to go to bed, so I went to bed. And that sort of ends the story for that night, right? I decided to go to sleep. I decided to include this image because I think it's rather funny. I decided to go to sleep. I wake up the next day. I got about 4 or 5 hours before the tournament. And we're still messing around with final decks. Instead, Romer's gone to sleep. I'm screaming with Sleepy Ponder at this point. Sleepy Ponder comes back and gives me this deck, which is his version of a refined Kaisar deck, right? The idea is that it is trying to, like unambiguously level... I've said that word a lot. Level Kaisar as soon as possible. We're running cards that are pretty bad, like Silverwing Diver, and, you know, Genevieve's actually not that bad, and Rune Runner's not that bad, but you're running them just to, like, turbo level the Kaisar, especially since Kaisar lost her keyword, and while Lucian replaces it, it replaces it in lieu of another unit that was giving you a keyword anyway, right? This list seemed fine and strong enough, and we played it a little, but there was also a game where we don't get Kaisar, and that level of fail rate is something I didn't really want to accept in the CDS. It's just not something I was willing to deal with. But what is noteworthy about this deck is that there's got a champion strength in it. But we'll move that a little bit for later. When playing these games, playing against a deck like Kane Aatrox, we were experiencing something where Kane Aatrox was able to, like, pressure us constantly, right? It's the same for the Poriking deck, but eventually you're able to sate yourself and go over. But the Kaisar deck, our pressure wasn't getting high enough towards the end, and our pressure at the early game just was non-existent because we weren't evolved yet. But I was looking at this deck, and I was like, against Kane Aatrox, what if I just played Sun Guardian on 3, and I played Leona on 5, and then I won? Right? How does Kane Aatrox deal with Sun Guardian on 3? So we took this concept of playing like a more fair mid-range deck. Instead of just being outvalue, let's just be strong in our own accord. And try and take that to Leona. So then we went into Leona, and we're going to continue doing the storyline. And this worked pretty well. Sun Guardian on 3 absolutely destroys them. Solari Sunhawk prevents Ranger Knight Defector into the Darkenharp. It prevents Keen in some scenarios. Morning Light is really good in Leona decks, and it's really good in mid-range mirrors, because all you need to do is have 2 Morning Lights, 1 Sunhawk, and a Leona, and you will be able to deal with any single board that you want, right? I did add Champion Strength as a way to have a win con, and there was a lot of interaction pieces here with Concerted Strike and Sunburst. Riposte is also quite interesting against a deck like Kane Aatrox, as well as other things like Dragons and so forth. This worked pretty well. There were fail rates, right? And this deck does have inherent fail rates. If you don't draw Solari Soldier or Solari 2-drops, you're going to be backward on your Leona a little bit, and that allows the Kane Aatrox player to sort of play a bit slowly and then deal with things afterwards, right? And if you don't draw a Morning Light or a Champion Strength, you need to draw 2 Morning Lights typically, and even then you got to make sure that your board is still a little bit powerful. You still got to make sure you still have a Sun Guardian going on and a Ravoon going on. You sometimes do have a fail rate with this deck, but that's to be expected. You can't deny fail rates out of every single deck. But Sleepy Ponder saw this deck and was like, well, hold on, what if we added, like, elusives to the Leona deck? And then we thought about it for like 10 seconds, we were like, that sucks. But Sleepy Ponder kept that in his mind for a little bit. We played a few more scrims, and then he came back to me with a list that was a Champion Strength plus Elusives list. And now I'm going to introduce you to Lucian Cannon, which is a Champion Strength pile, basically. It's got Lucian and Cannon and Beard and all this sort of stuff. Primarily, it's running Bandle Commando, Kelp Maidens, and Skip, comma, open quote, King of the Reef, close quote. And the whole point is that you play those units, you play Champion Strength, and you win the game. We've got some cool cards that are sort of fulfilling that win con more. Vanguard Sergeant is like more copies of Champion Strength. This deck looks a little bit like Scouts, but it's trying to play like for like an elusive combo, which is probably better into a thing like Kane Aatrox that doesn't really have elusive blockers. there is also Combat Cook, which if Combat Cook dies, you can give something like the Scout weapon or the Can't Block weapon to one of your elusives and just go in for a lot. And this worked out really interestingly, but it was very clearly unrefined. And what I want to spend most of this video talking about is how we got this list from what we have here to what we ended up with. So Sleepy Punda gives me this list, and the first thing I notice, like my eyes just like laser eye on this, is that there are 3 heroic refrains. Now, heroic refrain makes sense in this list. The way Sleepy Punda justified it is that like you're trying to have ways to push 4 extra damage for relatively cheap, right? And if you compare to like Yordle Noxus decks in the past, they have tried to include one of heroic refrains in bits and bobs when like fervors and decimates weren't enough, right? Heroic refrain has seen play in these decks before, but I saw this card and was like, why isn't this Tellstones? And there are good reasons. Mana is relevant in an aggro deck especially, right? And you need to be able to find ways to justify the other possible use cases being around. You can think of Electro Harpoon and it makes sense. It's burn. And you're an aggro deck, of course you want to have some level of burn. But Heroic Refrain not costing mana was important. But I looked at this card and we played some games. And what we noticed was that there were times where I had Heroic Refrain in hand and having Tillstones was better. Why? Because the best way to beat this deck as Keen Aatrox is Keeper of the Box plus the Darken Harp. And Keeper of the Box plus the Darken Harp gets blown out by Electro Harpoon. So we saw Heroic Refrain and we saw that if this card was banned on Tellstones, it would help us in this position a lot more. Also helps in other matchups in possible scenarios, but we were mostly thinking of Keen Aatrox. Can help in other scenarios on occasion, right? But that's the first change we made. The next thing we saw was Petricide Broadwing. Now, this is a good Demacia card. It is hard to imagine not bringing a Demacia deck with this card in it, right? Same with blocking MajiinBae. And when Sleepy Punda made this deck, what he said to me was, I saw it was a Demacia deck, the first thing I did was add 3 Petricide Broadwing. But when playing against Keen Aatrox, there wasn't anything we wanted to Broadwing. You can Broadwing the Keeper of the Box, but that only matters after turn 4 because they're not going to play it early and the challenger doesn't happen instantly. You're not going to really feel amazing about challenging the 3-mana 3/3, especially if it's got any weapon on it. At that point, it's just not really worth your time. There's nothing really that you want to Broadwing. And so I looked at Broadwing and I was like, what other units could fulfill something better than Broadwing, right? Broadwing isn't really accomplishing what we want in this deck. So we looked through the list and what we found was Laurent Bladekeeper and Scrutinizing Sergeant. And these cards are cute as hell. Scrutinizing Sergeant lets you find things like your Vanguard Sergeant quicker. It lets you find more elusive units. We only run 9 elusive units. We don't have that many for our elusive unit champion strength deck. And Scrutinizing Sergeant allows us to develop 2 units in one action. Relatively powerful. Laurent Bladekeeper does exactly what we wanted to do in this deck though. Same thing that Combat Cook was trying to do, which was to buff up an elusive unit, right? Skipped King of the Reef into Laurent Bladekeeper, feels pretty good. There was also a game where I did Laurent Bladekeeper onto Lucian because I didn't have any elusive units around this time, and it actually felt not too bad. Laurent Bladekeeper is like, this is the deck Laurent Bladekeeper was built for. This is the whole point Laurent Bladekeeper exists in this game. I mean, sure, it's a buff Fiora, make her a 1-unit win con, but creating 1-unit win cons is what Laurent Bladekeeper's for, and it was really, really cute, and it felt rather good. All right, we played a few games. The next thing we noticed was that these spells, they're a little bit weird. So, Ban on Tellstones was good, right? Like, it felt all right. It's a few too many copies of a card that's a little bit weird and techy, but felt all right. Ranger's Resolve is a card that Sleepy Punda and I are big fans of, especially in mid-range decks, right? We recount countless stories around the campfire of beating insane hands by playing Scouts and Ranger's Resolve and just putting them together. But Ranger's Resolve didn't make too much sense. When you're thinking about like what Ranger's Resolve does and why you're justifying it over something like Chain Vest or even like Catch, you need to be saying Ranger's Resolve is protecting 2 units in this combat or in this trade or whatever. And against a deck like Keen Aatrox and general mid-range stuff, it's not doing that, right? I think it's a little bit reductive to just view Ranger's Resolve as an AoE defense card. It should be seen as something like Troll Chant, where it can interact with 2 or more combats, but in a very minute way. And just in this matchup, our units were going to die if they blocked Keen Aatrox's units anyway. So we didn't need to like be protecting multiple. It didn't make sense with how the matchup worked. Form Up, however, felt great. There were scenarios where they went in for a single Furious Wielder, and Form Up let us keep our unit alive, right? We do something like a Champion Strength, and then we do a form up afterwards, or something more like a Vanguard Sergeant's for Demacia, right? Form up was able to save us in a fair few scenarios, right? Pokey Stick was weird. There are two things that can be pokey sticked in Kane Aatrox: Forsaken Bakai and Dark Enthrall. These are not things you want to be pokey sticking. And what we found was that with this deck, if you're on turn 6 and 7, you can't really find good opportunities to spend that 2 mana on pokey stick and feel happy about it. You'd rather be developing units. You'd rather be developing For Demacia or Champion Strength or Form Up, right? Pokey stick does have 0 hand cost, but it does have a mana cost. And so there wasn't any reason to be using pokey stick. So we thought about our matchups. We thought, what spells are actually going to do good things for us in these matchups? Riposte does really, really well. It means that Kane goes from trading up into a unit to trading down into a unit and dying. Same with the other quick attack unit, same with stuff like Aatrox. It also means, and this is really important for a deck like Kane Aatrox, right? If you riposte something, there is 0 way for them to kill that unit, pretty much, right? Unless it's quick attack plus Furious Wielder, that unit is staying alive and dealing more damage. Harsh Winds won't kill the unit, or Unforgiving Cold rather, won't kill the unit. Furious Wielder won't deal with the unit. It creates such a big blowout, that riposte card. So we moved things around a bit. There's one more spell that I want to talk about, which is Puzzling Signpost. So there's a few things that I should mention about Kane Aatrox. Most lists aren't on Utter Devastation, but if you're Slay and you're looking at my lineup and you're seeing a bunch of mid-range champions, you might be thinking, Utter Devastation is probably pretty good here. I might bring Utter Devastation. Now, Red Gwen can beat Utter Devastation because it's got Harrowing, and my Plunder list, as you will see later, is on FTR. And is also aggressive enough such that, as normal against like Ruination decks, you pressure them enough such that if they play Utter Devastation, they still lose, and if they don't play it, they lose, right? That's the sort of checkmate you put them in. Puzzling Signpost did 2 things. 1, Kane Weapon kind of forges itself. So if Kane sticks around for a while, you can Puzzling Signpost to protect a unit when they like Kane Shadow Step it post For Demacia, right? So I'm imagining I'm playing For Demacia, their Kane that has already attacked twice does a Kane Shadow Step, tries to kill a unit. I Puzzling Signpost either the Kane spell or more likely the Kane Weapon. The unit dies, I win the game, right? That's the sort of scenario I'm picturing. It came up more often than you'd think. Puzzling Signpost also just denies World Ender, which can be relevant. Puzzling Signpost was a card that I kept finding scenarios where it felt right, despite how weird it was. I mean, even just denying a Furious Wielder before your For Demacia goes off can be enough to give you the lethal. So this spell suite looks a lot better to me. I think they could have been lined for like a second riposte, but you don't want to have too many spells in your like unit-based swarm deck, right? But the next thing we looked at, and I'm going to highlight Sergeant and Strength for this. What I'm going to say isn't that we're going to remove some of these cards because they aren't fulfilling what they need to be. They are fulfilling what they need to be. But we had a game where I drew 3 Vanguard Sergeant, 2 Champion Strength, and I wasn't able to win. Now, obviously, if you draw too many of the same cards, your food is going to be very bland. You want to make sure your food is diverse and full of flavor so you're able to do many win cons, right? Like, find ways to win because your units are very spread out and dense, right? Having a lot of the same food is just not going to be enough. I hope this analogy sort of works. Now, Sergeant and Champion Strength are like the best spices in our deck. But we got to make sure that like the actual food that they're being served on is relatively good. And we use this to sort of analyze like what is our deck trying to do, right? We've only got 9 elusive units. If we don't draw 3 of them, we're not going to win just off elusives. Instead, attacking with units is going to be relevant. So we're going to look at our deck and figure out how do we make it such that our Champion Strength and our Sergeant is winning us the game even if we're drawing relatively bad hands, right? Now, I'm going to show you what the list looked like, and this is the final list that we submitted. And it looks something like this. The new cards that are added are 1 Mecha Pulverizer, which I'll get into later. We'll talk about that last. But Conchologist and Grandfather Fay. Let's talk about Grandfather Fay first. I justified to you Scrutinizing Sergeant earlier. Let's consider Scrutinizing Sergeant, and let's consider Grandfather Fay. One is very, very clearly better than the other. Right, Scrutinizing Sergeant, 5 mana, doing what Grandfather Fay does for 3. And that also has Spell Shield. Grandfather Fay is absolutely amazing, and I'm really glad we added it. And Conchologist is a card that I sort of forgot to yell at Sleepy Pundit to add. But Controller just makes sense in what this deck wants to do. It lets us find spot removal for certain matchups. We're thinking like in Kane Aatrox, we're probably wanting to use Silence and Suppress, but we didn't want to main deck Silence and Suppress because if they don't bring Kane Aatrox, Silence and Suppress is a brick. But Controller just lets us possibly find Silence and Suppress while also looking around for other things. The last thing I want to mention is Mecha Pulverizer. We took out Combat Cook for Mecha Pulverizer. Combat Cook is a 4-mana card that draws you a 2-mana card that then eventually could be put on an elusive unit to maybe help with a little bit of damage. On the other hand, Mecha Pulverizer is a 3-mana card that can be put on an elusive unit and will guaranteedly feel fucking amazing. So Mecha Pulverizer, just as a cute one-of, I think made a lot of sense. We do have cards that are not too relevant for us. I'm thinking like Kilt Maidens and Bandle Commando do create tokens, and we can also discard cards like, you know, we can discard stuff like Kennon's token or a Beard if it's a little turn too late or something like that. The discard part isn't too relevant because by the time you win, you'll typically have a couple of cards in your hand anyway because you're winning through units plus champion strength. But we're able to go for a lethal. There's a few more things I want to mention. These are just little tidbits. One is that Kennen and Lucian actually felt good in this deck. In Kaisar and in Leona, Lucian just existed. His level up would never have occurred, and if it did, you're losing the game. While in this deck, if Kennen and Lucian exist, like, they're 1-mana 2/1 quick attacks, and they're irrelevant because when they're buffed by champion strength, that is a 1-mana 6/5 quick attack. That ain't bad. The quick attack keyword is actually relevant in a situation like this, as well as with Laurent Bladekeeper, right? Aloof was a card that I think is worth keeping as a one-of. You can do interesting things with it by killing like an Aatrox, and that might help you get a certain type of lethal. It helps fill out weird curves, and there was a little bit of draw that was missing from the deck and cycle that we felt was necessary. I never ended up playing it in any of the scrims, even though I drew it relatively often, but I felt like having Aloof Traveler was a really nice safeguard. That's pretty much all I wanted to mention about this deck, but look at this deck list right now and compare it to what we started with, which was this. And in my mind, this deck that I'm looking at right now looks incredibly unrefined. It looks like there's a bunch of cards that have cute concepts and we know what each card is trying to do. Like, I can look at Beard and be like, I know what that card's trying to do. I can look at Combat Cook and be like, yeah, I know what that card's trying to do. But this deck feels like it has been like lived through and is like accentuating what it wants to do as a deck, right? I'm looking at these cards and I have a storyline for what they are doing for my deck and why they need to be in this deck, right? Compared to this, which we can make these arguments, but it doesn't, to me, it doesn't look refined. Now, I am basically giving this like a vibe check. I'm saying, I don't think that this looks refined. And that doesn't like come across as very like scientifically scrutinizable, right? But to me, I compare these decks and this one looks refined and this one does not. Maybe that's just me though. I feel like there's a certain feeling I get by looking at these decks. So let's ignore CDS for a second. What actually happened? How was this deck refined and how can one refine a deck for a given scenario, right? Obviously, what I'm preparing for is a closed deck list format, right? And closed in as much as, like, there's only so much that Slay is able to do. But you can bring this logic into your opens with you. You're playing more with, like, much more wavier probabilities instead of something like Slay where, like, there's a 99% chance they're bringing mid-range and an 80% that mid-range is going to be Kane Aatrox. Going into an open, it's going to be more like somewhere between 20 and 40% are bringing Jananilla, or maybe at 60 and 80, we don't know. Let's deal with vibes and trying to figure out how that works. But the deck refining process is similar, it's just more wavy. But this is how I think is one way in which to refine a deck. The first thing that we did was start with our base idea. The two main questions you have to ask is, how does this deck win, and how does it win in a powerful way? If your deck is winning because you're like trying to very particularly math out a very like 3-card combo that also needs to make sure you're surviving through your combo, I don't think it's what you can justify. If you're like saying that the way in which you win most of your matchups is via having something very intricate and thin, it is really hard to justify that unless you really, really know what you're doing, right? You got to make sure your win con is prominent and powerfully presented. The next thing is when you make that list, you make your first iteration of this deck, what cards immediately blare out to you as weird? What cards are you like trying to justify for yourself? Or what cards seem as if there is an obvious thing that they could be changed with? This is like a very base level refinery step. It's sort of just like shaping the general themes of like making your deck feel as if it's not. It basically gets what is normally an overwhelming procedure of justifying every single card. You're justifying very specific ones that are obvious to just think about. So for this deck, it was something like Heroic Refrain, which can be easily spot counted as something like Bandle Tellstones, right? The next step is something a little bit more analytical and in-depth, which is what cards in their spots have felt useless or unfulfilling in their games. Every card in your deck, you must be looking at it and saying, this has a goal. This card is doing something. That is allowed to be pretty basic, right? Blocking BajiinBae in Shenjie 4 has a pretty basic goal. It is a unit that blocks favorably multiple times into aggro. It pressures a lot into control. That's it. It's pretty much all it's doing. It's not doing some specific tech cardy choice or making synergy business logic things in your deck. You're not like, it's not like Kinku Student where it's doing a specific role in a very specific and unique way, right? But I was looking at this, and the obvious connection to this in terms of the deck that we were bringing was stuff like Broadwing. Broadwing, what was its goal? I don't know. It's a good Demacia card. It didn't actually have a goal in these matchups. Control the board wasn't really doing that. I mean, they don't really have quick attacks, so if we're going to control the board, they can attack into me anyway, or we're going to control the board by having 6/5s into their 3/3s or 4/4s, right? Broadwing wasn't actually doing anything in that scenario, right? Similarly, the spell suite wasn't accomplishing their goals either. There wasn't an accomplishment of the goals. Every other card in that deck had a goal, right? Except maybe Aloof. But every other card, like Laurent Protege had a goal, Skip had a goal, all these sorts of things had a goal. The final step that we sort of came to is how can I accentuate the winning things, right? We've sort of made this deck feel more concise in the initial idea that we had. But let's revisit the initial idea and figure out, is there a way to do that thing even more powerfully? And the way we sort of came to that was like, elusives were not the only way to accentuate the deck, right? They're important, right? You will want them in your deck. It's important to have that sort of thing so they can't infinitely chump or they can sort of be pressured in different and unique ways. But they're not the be-all end-all. And going wide was just as cromulent. A good way Sleepy Punda put it is that the way that Kane Aatrox was able to beat the deck that we made in our scrims was when I was playing a unit and then Sleepy played a unit. Then I played a unit, then Sleepy played a unit, right? If I spend 1 mana, he spends 1 mana, I spend 2 mana, he spends 2 mana, and we just do that, his units are going to be bigger than ours and going to trade in possibly. But if I'm playing 3 units on turn 3 and Sleepy Punda's only playing 1, I am going to win eventually when my champion strength comes online or my Fortimatia comes online. That was a much more prominent way. I know I'm like explaining what a swarm deck is in like a very like, you know, oh, look at this creative new invention I just came up with. But I feel like it's important to realize that that is really what the deck is doing. That's its powerful thing. And viewing it in any other way is a little bit disingenuous to what it is trying to do, or inaccurate, I guess is the best way to put it. I'm going to quickly go over the other decks that we brought. These are just minor things. This isn't really about the storyline that I'm trying to make this video about. I really wanted to make this video about how we started with the Poro King and ended up with what I think is a relatively refined Kaisar Lucian deck after about a couple of... Oh, not Kaisar Lucian, sorry, Kennen Lucian after a couple of hours of working on it. This is Plunder. You know, it's got Bjerg because you really want Sejuani more. It's got Fuel the Rush to try and beat a possible thing. And also, like, if the game stalls out enough... Fuel the Rush plus 2 warning shots will make you win the game, right? Because you'll stun lock the board twice and you'll win by that, right? Spirits Unleashed feels amazing. Your units get bigger than Kane Aatrox on the turns where that matters, on turns, you know, 4 through 7. And this deck just feels good. I'm not going to talk about it too much. It's just Plunder. Red Gwen is like my child. Like, I love Red Gwen. I cannot say how much I love this deck. The unit suite is pretty much... exactly how I would imagine it. I don't think there's anything too interesting about the units. 3 Rearguard could have been 1 Biggest Fan and 2 Rearguard. It could have been Legion Saboteur. It could have been Pigeon, but I picked Rearguard. It felt like it was the best thing for what we were trying to do. This is able to go wide and swarm and also do these things. The spell suite is a little bit more interesting, I think. Quietus was really good into something like Kane Aatrox because you get to destroy the weapons, which is like killing a Stiratu, but for 1 mana. And also, like, making it so, like, the Darkened Spear no longer means that Rearguard trades into a Buru Cultist plus a Darkened Spear, right? Like, if I have the attack token on 2, and I've got Rearguard, Quietus, that's going to feel so much better than having Rearguard, not Quietus against a Buru Cultist plus a Darkened Spear, for example. Because Red Gwen is just a tempo deck, and that allows you to do a massive tempo play. Flock is really good into mid-range decks. Disintegrate is really cute in front of a Draven or a Gwen. And I thought it would be good against this mid-range deck. It's probably the cutest card I've got in here, and by cutest I mean the most willing to be on the cutting block. It was a last-minute decision to get rid of my second Glimpse Beyond for Disintegrate, but I went fine with it in the end. Glimpse is good in this deck. You just want to draw more cards. If they Furious Wield or something, you can just Glimpse Beyond, and now you have turned it into something really good for you, right? Might is all right. I wanted a way to get through Unforgiving Colds and to pressure a little bit more. Fervor and Vengeance are what this deck is to me, right? The first things I do when I make Red Gwen are type Gwen, add Gwen. Then I type Hollowed and add Host, Butler, Prodigy, and Eternal Dancers. Then I type Fervor and add Fervor. Then I type Vengeance and add Vengeance. That's the first thing I do whenever I make Red Gwen. Fervor allows you to do some really cute plays and lets you do trades and do burn, and Vengeance is Vengeance. It is so much of a case that you need Vengeance in Red Gwen, in my opinion. Lets you kill important units, lets you play for tempo plays, lets you protect yourself from certain things. It's really powerful. Pirouette is just third Arachnoid Sentry, but you can play it with Spell Mana. Arachnoid Sentry is better typically, but sometimes Arachnoid Sentry plus Pirouette is better than double Arachnoid Sentry given your hand. That's the reason Pirouette's there. Survival Skills is there because I have Draven. Now, Survival Skills was really interesting into Canine Trucks because I don't think it's a bad idea to just play Survival Skills for 5 mana against a deck like Cane Aatrox. Like, I'm imagining it's turn 7, and they have developed Aatrox, and they've got something like an Arcady Harp on the field, right? They need to play Aatrox because I've got some Threatening Fervor or something, so my burn is a little bit prominent. And then I just play Survival Skills. And then their attack, where they're going to pressure me and try and trade down my board, no longer matters. I'm getting my Draven Axes now. I'm going to be able to whittle down their units so that they die quicker to overwhelm stuff. Survival Skills I thought was nice. Plus, you know, if I have an axe and a Survival Skill, it's going to feel really powerful and blowouty. I thought it was cute as a one-of. Finally, Harrowing's how you're winning with this deck. Just wanted to go through the spell suite, particularly in Red Gwen, because I think it's very fun, and I love this deck, and I'm really glad I got to play it. A couple more things I wanted to talk about regarding these decks. A little just miscellaneous things that I thought would be a little bit fun to mention. One, back when we were doing Shurima Poro King, I really, really regret not trying the Absolver. When we were playing Shurima Poro King, we were trying to simply just go bigger than them and win because we have more stats than them. But if we just added Absolver, we would be able to actually apply pressure, right? Absolver plus, like, the snacks that gives Challenger would have been enough to win a lot of these games. And now that I'm thinking about it, like, Absolver would have won me a lot of games that I lost in that matchup if it was just in Stream of the Poro King. You've got Predicts. You're allowed to have 2 Absolver and feel fine about it. Another thing I wish I'd put a little bit more effort into was Draven Nilla Tide Dancer. I thought there was some interesting stuff where Draven Axes level up the Tide Dancer and allow you to sort of do that thing. Unfortunately, this deck will seem a little less strong because Nilla won't be flipped on 7. You're not running Janna, so the Nilla package doesn't flip her on 7, and Draven's region doesn't really allow that either. It's not PNZ, you just can't do it, right? So it's not really going to work that well, but whatever. One thing I want to mention is that when we were on Leona, there was a few games where we had Captain Arica in our Leona deck, and I thought that was kind of cute. Captain Arica felt really interesting into Cane Aatrox, but unfortunately we didn't go with it. That's pretty much what the strategy went like. So, like, to recap all of what happened, right? We started with 2 decks that we thought were going to be pretty good options of Red Gwen and Plunder, and then we bounced around with the 3rd deck, and we went from idea to idea based on some really interesting matchup decisions, right? We thought maybe one way to beat Cane Aatrox is to go larger than it, then we found we weren't consistently doing that, so we went to Shurima. We found that Shurima wasn't consistently doing that, so we tried to do something else that was sort of Shuriman because we liked the spells, such as Quicksand and Rite of Negation, and so we went with Kaisar. Kaisar felt like it was not doing powerful enough things often enough. Early turns and late turns weren't being powerful enough, but what does have good early turns and late turns consistently is Leona. So we tried Leona. Felt alright, but sometimes it didn't happen, but we saw that Champion Strength was a good way of going about it. We went to Ken and Lucian, and then Ken and Lucian was able to do some interesting things. We tried to refine that deck with some of the strategies that we were talking about, and that's how that ended up happening. I don't think the way that we refined the deck is the only way to refine a deck. Every, you know, deck builder has their own strategy of refining decks. But I think that for the short time that we had, keep in mind that this was like a couple hours before the game, I think we did quite a good job, and I'm really proud of it, and I think there's good ways of showing how that happened. Alright, we submit our decks a couple minutes before deck lock is due. Always do it last minute, just in case you want to make a change. And so let's look at what Sley ended up bringing. And their first deck may not shock you, it was Cane Aatrox. Let's go. They weren't on the Utter Devastation, which I was really, really happy about. And also, their equipment was a little bit different to what we were practicing into, because we were practicing into the Darkened Fan, a non-zero amount. But I was really happy to see this. Now, Unforgiving Cold can be a really important card for us to deal with, but this was pretty good. I was really happy to see this is what their deck was. This felt great by me. Having Kane Aatrox was great. Our decks were mostly beating Kane Aatrox, but we're going to be able to beat Kane Quinn sorry, like Aatrox Quinn and Red Gwen, right? We didn't talk about how we were going to beat those matchups too much when I was giving this description to you, but there were cards and decisions that were made, keeping in mind that it might just not be Kane Aatrox, right? I talked a little bit about it when it came to like the recall spell and like the destroying equipment spell, but that's how this happened. We got Kane Aatrox, exactly what we wanted. The other two decks that Sley brought were, and I've had to mess around with this a little bit to keep my face in, but also to make sure you can actually read the cards, was Nora Seraphine. This deck is relatively scary for a lot of our decks. The fact that there's Group Shot, Pytos, Divine Draft, Drop the Bomb, Encore, High Note, Mystic Shot, Pokey Stick, Aftershock, Howling Gale, Lightning Rush, Sump Fumes, Wallop, and like, you know, other pieces of interaction, like Seraphine's High Note. Playing Champion Strength is scary. Right, we play Champion Strength, they kill 3 of our units, we're not winning anymore, right? Red Gwen becomes a little bit scary. Stuff like Boisterous Host and Phantom Butler are no longer going to deal their guaranteed 2 or 3 damage, and then their 1 damage over the course of literally every other turn for the rest of the game, right? And they do have ways of killing Gwen with things like Howling Gale, right? And they have, in theory, ways of killing Draven with Aftershock. This deck obviously is not going to be the most consistent, but you shouldn't be looking at all these one-ofs as one-ofs, but like saying there are like 12 to 15 pings, right? 12 and 15 pieces of interaction. Can my deck beat a deck that draws, you know, 5 of those by the time we need a win? Maybe even 6? Not really. And so this deck was a little bit scary. Let's do a little bit of a game for their last deck. These are their champions. Vote now on your phones. What deck do you think this is? Do you think it's Dragons? Obviously, this is Dragons. It's Shyvana Asol. It must be Dragons. Or maybe you're realizing that this is probably not Dragons, because otherwise I wouldn't be doing this bit with you. So maybe you're thinking, it's Peak. It's Cytheria, Lady of the Clouds, Peak. Why would you play Asol without Peak? Might be going on in your brain. Or maybe you're thinking something different. Maybe you're like, this is out of the way Divine Judgment. You're playing mid-range. I'm going to do out of the way. I'm going to do Divine Judgment, and you're going to be able to win. Or maybe you're doing the very, very logical play and thinking, this is fucking Cosmic Call, isn't it? And may have realized what the answer is. It was Cosmic Call. The last deck was a Cosmic Call deck. It was Shyvana, Asol, Cosmic Call. Shyvana was the best choice. It's not just because Asol's a dragon. If you look at the other champions, your options are like Pyke and Quinn. And Shyvana was the better choice out of all of those. This deck looked a little bit scary. And there were things like, if they Falling Star Gwen and Fang 6 on the board and cannot be Quietest anymore, and there aren't really good Quietest targets in the deck, Red Gwen might have had trouble into this. We thought that Ken and Lucian was going to just, like, breeze through this. There's no real way Ken and Lucian struggles into this. And we thought Plunder was inevitably the ban, right? Like, it was going to be hard to see Plunder not be the ban anyway. But with this being another deck, it's just like Plunder's very clearly the ban. So Red Gwen was going to be the hardest deck to get through, and we thought that Red Gwen would have a tougher time into the Nora deck than it would have into this deck, so we banned the Nora deck, the Nora Seraphine, a million pings. That is pretty much all I wanted to say. I don't have any more slides. So those are... That's how we got to this, and this is what all the pre-prep was. We are going to go through the games now, but there is a reason why the games are not the most interesting part of today. Now, they're interesting, but they're not the most, like... We're not going to be able to analyze too much. They are pretty one-sided. I'm going to... Instead of watching the game like live with you and then pausing and talking about them, I'm just going to show you a game and then respond to the game, give a few thoughts on the game. Then I'm going to show you the other game and respond to them. Partly because, one, I think my commentary is actually pretty spot on in terms of talking about my thought processes going through it. And two, you'll probably see why. Hope you've enjoyed this little intro bit. I'll see you after the game one, and we'll talk about it then. Bye! Alright, good morning and welcome back to Spidz YouTube. We're playing CDS. I'm sure I've made an intro for this. I'd be surprised if I have not. We are bringing Plunder, Red Gwen, Elusive CS. These are the 3 decks. Okay. It is Red Gwen. It is Plunder 2. And it is Elusive CS. I'm banning Nora. Going into the bin. Hopefully I can beat Kane Aatrox. Oh, I'm in my happy place though. I get to play Red Gwen. They're gonna ban Plunder. Be very surprised if they do not. Yeah. Okay, let's start with Cannon Lucian. They start with Cane Trucks. Alright, let's pick up the Cane Trucks list. Now they're on 2 Unforgiving Cold, which can be a little bit scary, but hopefully we can just outgame them with Cane Trucks. None of these say CS, so I feel like I'm supposed to fall again. So we will do so. Okay, this is good. This deck's very, very interesting. I'm surprised at how well it works. This is a Sleepy Punda creation. But this is one of the few times I've not drawn CS immediately, so maybe we'll lose for once, because we didn't draw CS. This isn't a bad hand in terms of just swarm potential, like absent of having the card. Oh, Skip is beautiful. I think I'm allowed to do this block. Some may disagree with this, but when I was scrimming with Sleepy Punda, that block was something like a decision that we could have made, and I ended up not taking it, even though I think I should have taken it at the time, because they're going to struggle with units and we're a swarm deck. So making it so that they can't block like at all is very, very happy. Like this Owlcat goes so hard now. Like look at this. I'm going to play probably Bandle Commando. Just get more units. Like that's why I did that block. Now they could have had Momentous Choice, but they're sort of scared of form up as well. Which I should be on 3 of right now. Yeah. Oh my... this poor guy. Oh my god, I'm so sorry, Slay. Oh Jesus, oh my god. Okay. Well... poor Sleepy Punda, man. We spent hours practicing this deck and they just draw nothing. Oh my god, poor Slay. Okay. Alright, Red Gwen time. Alright. Alright, that game was fucked. We don't have to delve too much into it, that game was fucked. To say what their hand was, so Sleepy Punda watching their perspective live, I presume it was on a delay, but I'm not entirely sure. And I can't access the VODs. I can't tell you exactly the hand. My understanding is that the hand was Aatrox, 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 Kane, and then like Furious Wielder, Momentous, or something along those lines. Something unplayable, right? That's fucked. Like, I feel bad, right? So they'll have 7 cards by the end of this. Hold on, let me quickly get the pen. Right, they have 7 cards by the end of this. My understanding is that it's Aatrox, 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 Kane, and then something like a Furious and a Momentous when they draw it, right? They surrender probably out of irritation, and probably because they're expecting to be fucked, right? They're expecting that we've got a CS and they just cannot win. I've got a few thoughts about this game, but obviously they're not going to be that deep because it was a 4-minute game and I blew them out of the water. It's really fucked. One is that I don't think they needed to surrender, right? I get that I have like an open attack on turn 5 that is going to be rather strong, right? We've got 1, 3, 1. It would end up being 3 and... what? 2? That's still not 13 damage. There's a good chance I'm supposed to develop on my next turn, because I can tell that their units are really bad. And maybe if I develop next turn, I can understand it. But here's the thing. I think if they've got Kane into Kane, they can do Kane spell, and then here's the thing. The Aatroxes aren't that bad, right? Like, Aatrox's Deathbringer sweep is pretty good into my deck. It will kill 3 units, and they've got the mana to spend on it. They don't have anything else to spend it on. And they can do that twice and heal, like, 14. If I don't have champion strength, I actually think their hand is not too bad. I don't think I'm presenting lethal on my turn 5 open. As far as I'm aware, I'm not presenting lethal on my turn 5 open, right? The 6 damage from both of the Owlcats, the 2 damage from these guys and the 2 damage from these guys, that's only 10, right? They're alive at 3, and they've got a Rast, and they've got Aatroxes with Aatrox spells. They should be fine. But I understand, emotionally, they have drawn nothing. I want to talk about the one major play that was actually sort of relevant, right? And it was this play here that I thought was a little interesting. So this play, I think, looked weird. Now, I explained it in the moment as that this is something that Sleepy and I prepared for. But I want to sort of, like, articulate as why I think this play works. First off, how did I get to this conclusion? I did a scrim with Sleepy. This exact same scenario came up. I played Lucian on one, they played Buru Cultist on one, and then they open passed on two. And I asked Sleepy, why didn't you attack? So clearly, you know, this is a situation I've seen all the time. I would always attack into Lucian here if I was Kane Aatrox, because Lucian's never blocking, so I'm always getting 2 extra damage. But Sleepy says that if you block here, it's actually way worse for me. And so I ask why. The logic is that if I block, right? If they want to keep this unit around, they have to do momentous choice, and if I form up, it blows them out of the water. That's one reason. Furthermore, we know that there's no units in this hand, but destroying, like trading a unit this way is going to benefit me. An equal trade means that I will still be able to maintain my go wide and have more manipulation over combat. Sleepy Panda, or in this instance, Slay, will maintain manipulation by having as much board presence as possible and being able to cycle weapons or pick how the strike spells or the harsh winds goes off and manipulate combat in that sense. Despite the fact that this unit is better than this unit in general, having access to something that can be Dark and Speared, so this has 4 health, or Dark and Aegis, so this has 3 health and like the tough keyword, worst drawing ever, or even like a Bloodletters is way more valuable to the Kane Aatrox player. So in this scenario, Sleepy Panda says, I should block. Now, I still think that's weird. I haven't been in scenarios where this has happened. It seems very awkward to me. But I can't find an issue in my logic, right? Now, does this mean Slay misplayed? I think the technically correct answer is no. Because I think that you're not just playing a perfect game when you're playing LoR. You're not trying to make sure that every decision you make is going to beat the world's best chess AI or like Deep Blue or something. You're trying to beat me, Spidz, and I'm not going to be making perfect plays. Most people don't do this block. Ergo, you should do this attack because this attack will work against most people. It's like the backward side of bluffing, right? I think that's really interesting. I think this attack is correct because most people wouldn't take this block. At least as far as I'm aware, because this block never would have occurred in my mind if it wasn't for the scrim I did with Sleepy Panda. And so I just thought that was really interesting. I think it's correct to do this attack. You may also think that since Slay, like, had no cards in hand, that clearly Slay mismulliganed. According to Sleepy Panda, the mulligan was something like 2 spells, like, I don't know, Expanses and Furious Wielder, this unit and RKD. And you're not, I think, allowed to keep RKD against an aggro deck. Maybe you are, but you probably want a weapon or something. I don't know. It's close. You probably just want to find Forsaken Bakai and like Momentous Choice and stuff, right? Or Dark and Spear. Like, there's more cards that you want that aren't RKD. I don't think the mulligan was bad. I think this was just like an unfortunate game. But we'll go to the next game and I'll see you after that one. Bye. Yes, I want early cards. I want to be sort of aggressive. And Ruin Reckon is cute, but not exactly what I want. Yeah, this is a good hand. Having an early mulligan is great, especially against this deck. Turns out I'm just fucking... Oh my god. Okay, again. 1 drops. Does he have Darkened Spear? Expecting a little bit of Darkened Spear in my life. It's like that Mambo number 5 song. Little bit of Darkened Spear is all I need. Yeah, I should probably quiet as her. Now, I don't know if I'm going to play Sentry. I'm probably not playing Sentry. But I could play Sentry. There is a lot of damage that could occur. I just don't know if I want... I think I want a double Sentry later. Right? Like, turn 7 attack. I double Sentry and I try and win then. Sounds like relatively punishing. I obviously need to draw cards for that to actually make sense. If I develop, they're going to have the fucking the shapeshifter man, Shadowblade Fanatic. I think I'm still supposed to develop. This is an interesting hand. We are low to the ground. There's a lot of draws that can sort of make us feel better. I am gonna full swing. Okay. Like if they do Zolani or something on 6 and then Aatrox on 7, I'm fine. Reckoner helps me with like the plan I'm going for quite a bit actually. I'm really happy to see Reckoner here. It really fills out what my curve wants to do, I think. Okay. If I saw Draven, by the way, I would have kept him in hand. Like, I think just having survival skills and having a 3-3 thing is always worth it in this matchup. Like, they're so scared of survival skills whenever they attack into me. What are they thinking about? What have you got, man? Forsaken Bakai? You're trying to equip a weapon. Which weapon? That one. Okay. Makes sense. They want to pressure. Don't know why they wouldn't do that before combat, but sure. Instead of... Yeah, do we do Redeemed Prodigy instead of Reckoner? And stun on a future turn? I really like Redeemed Prodigy into Sentry if they've got Kayn, while this is worse into Kayn. Yeah, let's do it this way. This is much better into Kayn. And they haven't played a lot, so I think Kayn is very much on the cards. Shadow Fiend. Well, should we commit to the stun line anyway? Or do we want to double stun in future? Stun is a lot of damage. And they have been sort of weird about units. I think a better player might not do the stun. I'm going to do the stun. Because it's what I know how to do. It's what I know to do. Like, to me, it feels right to stun here. But I can't figure out why I shouldn't be trying to double stun on a future turn. Like, that also seems extremely logical to me. They could have Unforgiving Cold. Unforgiving Cold would be pretty fucked for me. But for me to have to deal with. Let's attack. Like, they could just block both of these in Unforgiving Cold, and I'm in a really awkward position without harrowing. Okay, no Unforgiving Cold. They don't do this if they don't have Unforgiving Cold. And I think they play Unforgiving Cold if they've got it. Kayn is very annoying, especially if they have Shadow Kayn. There's a chance I'm even supposed to stun Kayn this turn, but probably not. I'm probably supposed to stun Kayn next turn. They're just going to kill 2 of my units, and I just sort of have to accept it. If they attack me, I might intentionally lose my Reckoner. Rear guard, okay. Oh, Aatrox over Kayn. Okay. Here's Reckoner. If they attack me, I'm blocking with Reckoner, because I want to have the second half of him. Do I want to give him Zolani? No, I think I'd rather to block most. And then playing Reckoner, getting rid of Aatrox is very, very nice. Alright. Draven. 1 turn too late, my good friend. Three hollowed, we're probably buffing up host. That way it's 5, 6, 6. Like, 2 of these make 6, these 2 make 5. It's just bad into Unforgiving Cold. Furious Builder? Oh, Aatrox spell. This is Aatrox spell. They're gonna put it on Furious Builder. No, it is Furious Builder. So they're actively deciding not to play Kayn. Seems kind of crazy to me. So this is not lethal, right? Like, let's be real here. This is not lethal. I think I'm supposed to play Draven then. And provided Draven is first, it will trade up, right? Trade up into Kayn or whatever. I think they're low on units and they've got a bunch of weapons. Or weird spells. And that's why they're sort of acting weird. Alright, they've got Unforgiving Cold. Which means that I want to put all the hollowed stacks on this guy. Another Furious Builder? If so, I get to survival skills. Okay. This does say strongest, right? Yeah, okay. Okay, good game. Quick 2-0. Oh, this feels good. Congratulations. Good game, Slay. Congratulations to me, and especially to Sleepy Bunder, who helped a ton. And thank you to Roma as well. Roma and I scrimmed for maybe 3 or 4 hours. Sleepy and I scrimmed for about 2 or 3. But this worked out very well. This was a very quick 2-0. Aggro sort of fucks shit up. I'm gonna go hang out with Sleepy Bunder and celebrate. Thanks for watching. Alright, now I think my in-game commentary for this game is actually pretty spot on. I think I talk about a lot of the things that I want to be thinking about, and so I'm not going to delve on every single play. But I wanted to talk a little bit about this sort of thought process that I have about, like, what is the right thing to do with 2 sentries in your hand? In my head, Red Gwen is a tempo deck, so what you want to be doing is making sure that you have turns where you're creating the most, like, exacerbated value per card, right? And the way you do that is by using your cards like Sentry and so forth into creating massive tempo spikes. Now, tempo is sort of multiplicative in as much as like 2 Arachnoid Sentries on 1 turn is going to input more tempo in that turn compared to doing those sentries out of turn. The only value in doing a sentry out of turn is if you're getting a tempo spike 1 turn and tempo spike another turn, and those tempo spikes are mutually exclusive. Now, the thing is, that's relatively common in a card game, that these spikes will be mutually exclusive, because tempo spikes cost mana, and in this game they cost board space, and so forth, right? And they can also be influences based on the sort of cards they have, right? So, while 2 sentries in 1 turn is going to be better than 1 sentry on 1 turn, 1 sentry another turn, even if they both play for a tempo spike, the fact that they cost like 6 mana to do both, and 2 actions and other sorts of resources can make that not the case. In my head, against Kayn Aatrox, it's not really a deck that can punish tempo spikes that well, because Kayn Aatrox plays for a very consistent, constant unit thing that has very clunky spells and can't punish that sort of thing. But I think that theory of being able to play 2 sentries and for it to be applying a lot of pressure or tempo in that sort of instance is misguided in like normal card game logic, right? By the time this play will happen, I will have drawn 2 more cards. Those cards will also happen to cost mana, and they will be things that I will be wanting to do on those turns, right? Meaning that I should be spending my mana now and getting the most value out of the mana that I can get this turn, because I will find value for that mana in a future turn. In addition, like, pressuring is important, and I'm not going to be able to consistently OTK with 2 Arachnoid Sentries. I am going to have to be doing consistent chip damage, and it will give me further longevity, especially since there's only like 6 board space, right? I just wanted to talk about that a little. I think, like, in my mind, I was getting so lost in what is, like, ideologically correct, and I do, like, fully stand by that, like, 2 sentries in 1 turn is more, like, tempo accessing than just 1 sentry in 1 turn, 1 sentry, then another turn. But that's, like, only talking about these sentries. These sentries are able to accentuate other, like, aspects of tempo on their own that they can't do together for other reasons such as mana cost and board space and the sort of cards that Sley has access to at certain points of the game due to their mana and their board space, right? I just thought that was an interesting point. It was a little innocuous comment I made at around this time. Everything else, I think I played fine. I was aggressive properly. I really liked my decision to pivot from the Reckoner into the 2/2 and the Arachnoid Sentry. I quite like my decision to block with the Arachnoid, with the Fallen Reckoner. I think they misplayed by attacking. They should have sort of seen the Reckoner thing coming, but so be it. That's all I wanted to say today. To summarize, like, well, you know, what did you get out of this video? What was the point, right? One is that there's, I think, some cool storyline stuff about this EDS. I think there's just fun to be had there, as well as, like, the process I went through from starting on how I wanted to deal with a meta and how I decided to change my decks and then change between decks and change within decks to accomplish those sort of goals. And then you got to see a game where the enemy gamer surrendered on 4, and there were some interesting decisions regarding the Lucian block and, like, how Sentry works tempo-wise. But at the end of the day, it was a very quick 2-0, and I felt bad for Sley. I think he deserved a better game, and I think, like, the game of LoR deserved to have something a little bit better than what ended up happening, which is a very, very big blowout. But I prepped for this. And while I didn't prep specifically that the Kane Aatrox player would draw Bricky, I prepped for these matchups being extremely positive, and I sort of got it. So this was a successful week for me, and I shall see you next week for when we fight Jasensationals.